And next up, we have Matt Duncan, who is a managing director at Protiviti. It is a global business consulting firm. Matt brings over 20 years of experience advising C-suite clients on ways they can improve their employee experience, enhance working culture, and energize change and transformation initiatives. Matt will present how to improve experience in a workplace through a lens of intergenerational inclusion. He will share how organizations can enhance workplace culture by embracing diverse generational perspectives. Over to you, Matt, and welcome.
Super, thank you, Marta, and it's a pleasure to be here today. It's a really impressive event, the 24 hours of presentation. So well done to you and the team as well at Inspiring Workplaces.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to your presentation. So I'll leave you to it then.
Thank you. So great to meet you, everybody, and as I said, it's a pleasure to be here. I am Matt Duncan, as Marta said, and I'm part of our UK leadership team at Protiviti, leading all of our work that looks at change, transformation, improving employee experience, and working with our clients to really think about their workplace cultures. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a specific lens of improving workplace cultures, and that's intergenerational inclusion. So I'm going to talk about I'll explain why that's the lens we're bringing as well in a second, but I hope it's something that you continue to enjoy. So quickly, who are Protiviti? We are what I'd call a medium-sized consultancy firm. We're 2 billion, to give a kind of sense of size and scale in terms of annual revenues. We're across 25 different countries, and we operate in 90 offices, and we have 11,000 professionals that work for us. We are an organization that values the culture within our organization, but also the way we work with our clients highly. And it's a really integral part as to the way that we operate. As an example of this, we have a huge focus on our global diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And throughout all of our work, we want to make sure that we are helping our clients strengthen diversity within their organizations, that we are helping them think about the teams and the nature of the culture and the equity that they have within their workplaces. And we want to, through our work, expand the positive impact that we can have and our clients can have. So you can see a number of the things that we do externally and how seriously we take the topic. And there's a few logos on the screen there. And we've won a number of awards and got some recognition for our work as well. And most recently, being included in the Sarah Mount Inclusion Index is something that we are particularly proud of. So that gives a sense of why D&I is really close and core to our purpose. But today's conversation is to talk to you about intergenerational inclusion. Now, this is something that is a less researched area and less looked at area of DE&I. And it doesn't mean that we've got all of the other areas right, but it's an area that's been looked into less. And so what we at Protiviti have done is sponsored a piece of work by the Inclusion Initiative at the London School of Economics. And the Inclusion Initiative are a very impressive part of the LSE. And they take a look at various aspects of inclusion and diversity and link it to productivity in workplaces and seeing how proactive, positive interventions and programs to increase inclusion in the workplace can drive greater business outcomes. So the study that we are sponsoring is a 3-year study, and it's basically built upon 2 key premises. One is that age-diverse teams can enhance their organizational performance by thinking about the skills and the human capital skills that you have across the generations in the workplace, not just looking at the younger end of the spectrum. And the second is that organizations' ability to attract, retain the best talent is increasingly reliant upon the fact that you need to think about all of the generations that exist in your workforce. So don't just think about recruiting the youngest people, the newest people. Think about that across all of the age groups that you have within your organization. And so the study and the first of the 3 annual reports is due to launch next week. Will highlight what matters to workers across different levels of the organisation, and from the people that have just joined and to up to the executive, and then take a look at the different generations within that and proactive steps that can be taken. And I would like to share some of those insights with you. So first of all, it's worth thinking about what are the generations that the workforce is made up of today. And actually, in today's workforce, there are now 5 generations that you will find in the workforce. And I'll put these up on the screen here. And you have, from left to right, Generation Z or Z, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on, Gen Y or Millennials, Gen X, Baby Boomers or Traditionalists, and sometimes they're called the silent generation. And Gen Z are people that are born from 1997 and after. Gen Y or Millennials are people that are born between 1980 and 1996. Gen X is 65 to 79. The Baby Boomers between 46 and 64. And the Traditionalists or silent generation are people that were born before 1945. And because we have an aging workforce, people are staying in work longer. And it means that we as organizations and employers need to think more broadly about how we can keep people incentivized, how we can create inclusive workplaces for a broader breadth of people. So what do we need to consider when we think about the different generations in the workforce? Well, one thing is to think about, and just to confuse you, I've switched about the generation. So Gen Z is now on your right-hand side of your screen. But it's first of all important to look at the generations that you have within your teams and think about what do they typically care about? What is it that you know because of the period of time that they grew up in and the things that were going on in the world? What are they going to most look for in an employer and in a workplace? So if we look at the silent generation, which is only 2% of the workforce, but brings it a real valuable experience. It's people that are going to be loyal. They're going to be dependable. They have a natural respect for authority, and they're typically, as a generation, going to be responsible and conform. If you look at the baby boomers, they're likely to want to get involved in a lot of work. They are going to have a naturally optimistic outlook on life. They're going to be great team workers and want to make a difference. And then you get Generation X, which in most organizations will take up the current kind of the majority of the senior and executive positions in the organizations that we all work within. And they're much more likely to be self-reliant, will have grown up in the workplace being less impressed by authority. They'll be quite pragmatic, but may well be kind of more free agents and self-starters. And then you've got the millennials, who are really the bridge to the new kind of tech-led generation. And they're going to be more technologically savvy. There's going to be a sense of activism amongst them. They're going to be quite a competitive group. And then we've got the Gen Z, or as they're nicknamed here, the gamers. Now, this is the digital native group. They're real disruptors in the workforce, and they are going to be progressive and particularly driven. But they're also they've had bigger and different influences in their lives. So mental health has become a much bigger focus for this group, and it's important to use all of these things as an understanding and as you look at your workforce and think about them. There's excuse me. It's also worth saying that from the initial piece of research that the London School of Economics have done, is that they looked at what are the skills that each of these generations value most in their employers. And there were, overall across all generations, active listening was one that came across that was applicable for all 5 generations. The ability to manage time was interestingly important for a number of the generations, and then the ability to have judgment and decision making was something that these different generations had in common. However, there was big variation across the group. So for Gen Z, for example, active listening was really, really important. So where you've got a younger workforce, it's important to really think about how you engage with them. They were also wanted active learning, but they weren't worried about time management, and they weren't worried about things that millennials, Gen X, the baby boomers, and the silent generation were interested in. Whereas for the millennials and Gen X, the top skill that they valued the most in their colleagues in their workplace was actually the ability to manage time. And then if you go to the baby boomers, they wanted their number one thing was judgment and decision making. So we have different preferences and different things that each group is looking for. So what can we do as employers, and we do in our workplaces, to proactively think about how do we design an inclusive workforce, an inclusive workplace? How do we make it inspiring? How do we also make sure that that's a productive workplace? So there's a few things on here that are tips that we have as Protiviti when we're talking to our clients that are based upon the research that the London School of Economics has done. And first is to think about optimizing the productivity of your team by looking at the age gap between line managers and their teams. So the reason we say this is one of the most interesting findings from my perspective of the London School of Economics study was that if there is more than a 12-year age gap between line managers and employees, and that's either way, so it could be younger or older, or line managers and their teams rather, then people will self-report a productivity drop-off. Now, that to me was quite an eye-opening moment. So if the reason for this was because if there was more than 12 years, people were struggling to have anything in common, struggling to connect, struggling to motivate their teams. And so one thing you can practically do is take a look across your organizational spans and think about, well, what are the age gaps we've got on average, and how can we do something to design into our structure a productive and inclusive workplace that is going to work for us and work for our team members? So that's one thing that's based on the research. Another thing that the Inclusion Initiative have taken a big look at is the time spent in meetings and the generational representation that there is in meetings, and then the link through to productivity. And you can reduce the cost of unproductive meetings by increasing the generational representation within them. So achieving generational representation in meetings, the LSE had a survey of 3,500 people for this year's report, and they worked out that if you could reduce the level of unproductive meetings in organizations by increasing the level of generational representation, and that could save up to $13 billion a year across the entire economy in the UK. And that was quite an eye-watering statistic. There was also productivity benefits from the way in which people felt as well in those meetings. So 86% of employees who reported their last meeting to be inclusive were happy with their job, but for only 56% of people who had non-inclusive meetings. So that then has an obvious impact on retention as well. So thinking, and another statistic that came out of the study was that the majority of employees who reported their last meeting as inclusive, so that's 60% of employees, were unlikely to look for a new job in the next year, versus 36% who said that if their last meeting was non-inclusive, generationally inclusive, then they were likely to look for a job. So again, you can start to look at each aspect of your working day and think about, do I have generational representation where I need it? Another thing which a number of people of you will be doing anyway in your organization is think about the investment you're making in DE&I and corporate social responsibility. But don't be afraid to link the employee network groups that you might set up, or the people groups, whatever name you give them, to the purpose of your organization. Because what we've found over the last few years is that lots of network groups were set up by our clients, and actually, because they weren't given an organizational purpose that was towards driving the organizational goal, they became a bit lost. So what we are really working with clients now is to say, set up these employee network groups, really think about the generational inclusion within them, but don't be frightened to ask to in that context create an inclusive environment that is still held to account for helping the business perform. And that's been a subtle shift that we've seen be very effective in a number of areas. And then the final thing that we'd say is think about investing in the skills for the future across all generations. So as an example, most of our workplaces will be at least having conversations around AI, or whether it's theoretical or actually the organization that you work within is investing in it at the moment. But when we think about AI, I think most of us tend to then assume it's younger people that are going to be skilled in it, and younger people, so the Gen Zs, Gen Zs of the world, that are going to be those that are utilizing in the workforce. Well, actually, we'd have a different perspective. AI doesn't need to be the sole domain of Gen Z. It can be that across generations, we've seen people say that they would like to have, they would like to be upskilled in these areas. So think about your workforce, think about where there's interest, and think about the skills that you're going to need for the future. And then don't just invest the time in upskilling the youngest generation. Think about the entire suite that you have across everywhere. And then the final thoughts I'd like to leave you with is then thinking about diversifying the recognition that you provide employees, and diversifying that according to the interests and needs and kind of professional desires of the different generations that you have. So there's a table on the screen here, and I'm not going to read all of it, but it sets out per generation what are they likely to be motivated by, and what are their organizational desires? What are rewards that might be appropriate for one generation that wouldn't be for another? And then what are the red flags that you have that you might have as well? So, for example, if you can see here that the things to watch out for from a red flags perspective for traditionalists is that, yes, they want to have recognition and they want to be rewarded, but that doesn't want to be something that's public, and it doesn't want to be something that may be kind of where the spotlight is drawn towards them. Whereas if you think about Gen Z or Gen Z in the workforce, they're much more used to constant attention and wanting to be rewarded and recognized regularly and frequently, and that's important to them, important for their sense of identity, so the kind of more instantaneous communications. But don't underestimate the Gen Zs either. Listen to their ideas. They are the disruptors in the workforce, as I said earlier, and that's important. So that you can then look at the benefits you might provide each group. So traditionalists would be much more interested in the financial security now, and then the stability. You would have baby boomers who are going to be looking at sabbaticals and time off and really getting their work-life balance correct. Gen X might be more interested in looking at things where it might be tuition reimbursement. They'll have children that may be very expensive, or that it might be study they're doing themselves, and that could be something to think about. Gen Y and the millennials, they're going to want flexibility of schedule. They're going to want to think about, what are the learning opportunities? I want to continue to grow and learn, and there's a thirst for it. And as I touched on earlier, then Generation Z comes along with a different set of things that they would like to see as benefits. So it's the ability to have online access to certifications and training and instantly accessible, but also a much bigger focus on mental health care, not just physical health care. So again, we can all, as employers, start to look at our employee groups through a slightly different lens to make sure that we create these workplaces for them. So I will leave it there and see if there are any questions or anything that I can answer.
Matt, thank you so much for sharing those insights. That's so interesting. The research is coming out, did you say, next week?
Tuesday, yes. So it'll be on our website, and there's an event that people can watch this streamed as well, should they wish to.
Brilliant. Well, we'll make sure to tune into that, because there is so much wealth of knowledge within that. I think one thing that really stood out for me was this 12-year gap of productivity, and just, you know, the kind of the disparity between having younger generations working with you know, your older generations. And is there any, you know, how do you advise your clients on kind of bridging that gap? Do you just kind of, what sort of conversations are you having with clients around that? Like,
Yeah, that I agree. I mean, that statistic for me was fascinating. It was not something I'd really expected, or if I'm honest, thought about before. And at one level, it's really obvious, like all of these things, when you think about it. But it was interesting because it was how people were self-reporting. So they were self-reporting; they were less productive if there was this age gap, and that could be if someone was 12 years younger than their line manager or 12 years older. But on average, from the set of respondents, people did self-report this productivity drop-off if there was the bigger the age gap. So we, when we're talking to our clients, we don't just talk about this one thing in isolation, obviously, because it should be looked at in the whole around other initiatives that are taking place, etc., etc. But what we're really saying is, as well as the other aspects of diversity that you are probably likely to be looking at, and we hope that all employers are, think about the generational lens as well, because it's one that is talked about less. It's one that up until we started to have the sponsorship of the LSE, we weren't talking about too much. If I think back to 2022 or something like that, and that's interesting because it just gives you a different perspective. And so as you're setting up meetings, as you're thinking about the network groups you set up, as you think about how decisions are made in your organizations, go, which generations are actually making those decisions? And is it just one generation that's making the decision? And therefore, is there something you can do around having a shadow board or something like that? So it doesn't mean that you're going to put a brand new person that's Gen Z straight into your executive team. But should they have a louder voice in there, i.e. should there be a shadow board or some mechanism for more formally inputting into decision making? So it's that type of thing that we're discussing really, and it's interesting to see the responses that we're getting, because it's first of all the kind of eyebrow raising, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that, and go, wow, actually that's quite powerful.
It really is. And I think your answer to that question is just kind of like looking at it from the inclusivity point of, you know, we don't want to exclude anyone. We want to take probably what's the older generations have in terms of experience and wealth of knowledge that they're bringing to the workforce, and sharing that with the younger generations as well. So I think that kind of links with the previous generation we had from Jack when he was talking about all those aspects of age and work modes, etc. So I think it's a really, really interesting topic. Great. Well, thank you. If you have any other closing remarks you want to, just say about your presentation or give one point of advice, please do so right now. Yeah.
I think it's just think about generational inclusion in your workplace as well. And I dare say that for a lot of people, that might be a new angle when you're looking at your workforce. And just think about that, and then think about the team that you have around you and how you can create that generation inclusive work practice. And that is a great place to start.
Great. Well, thank you. That's really helpful. And thank you so much for your time today. We're probably going to have a short little break before we start our next presentation. But for now, thank you very much, Matt. Take care.
Thank you, Marta. Cheers. Bye-bye.